Okay. Hello, everybody. It's hit 5:30. I'm here with Wendy. Sometimes we wait around a little bit to see if people show up. But I think in this instance, we'll just get going. We said we'll start at 5:30, and here it is, 5:30. Now, in tonight's, or in this particular video interview, we're going to be talking to Wendy Jobling, who you can see here. Hello, Wendy. How are you?
Hi.
And we're going to be talking about the things that you can do to get the most out of Model Solar Vehicle Challenge. And the reason why we're doing that is that Wendy wrote an article called "Are You an Enabler?" And I remember reading it and thinking it's probably a pretty good topic to have on a video. So I can see we've got some people watching. By all means, just send hello if you wish, or if you have any questions anywhere along the way, by all means, ask them. And then we can cover those off during the interview, which I hope will only go for about half an hour. The reason why we also got Wendy in is after writing this particular article is that Wendy has actually worked as a teacher, and she has also worked in academia, teaching, and also researching teaching, particularly in the STEM area. Spiro's with us. Hey, Spiro, thanks for dropping by.
Hi, Spiro.
And Spiro's another member of the Victorian branch committee, and he's also a teacher who runs Model Solar Vehicle Challenge at his school. So because Wendy had that background, she's researched STEM, she's taught people to teach STEM, things like that. And she's also done a lot of research in Model Solar Vehicle Challenge specifically, that we thought she'd be ideal to talk about how teachers and parents and anybody who's got children involved in the Model Solar Vehicle Challenge can get as much out of it as possible. Now, Wendy, have I missed any sort of key points there about yourself?
No, I think you've summed that up really well, because I think it's important that people know that I've been involved with it for a long time, first as a teacher. And what really grabbed me about the whole program was that it wasn't kids just sort of, following directions and everyone making identical. I was working with boats, but also my students made a car or went on to make cars as well. And that they had to think about what they were doing, and they had to sort of problem solve. And that's the really important thing. And when I had some students, when I went into Deakin, I had some students interviewing the kids I was still teaching. I said, but you've been doing this, you did it last year and the year before, and now you're doing it again. Why do you keep doing it? And I said, because we can always think we can improve it. So it's that ongoing cycle of, researching by the students and improving. And
so some of those... If I'm asking a question about that one, so you haven't mentioned this before, and I'd forgotten the significance of that. You did actually this. So this is when you were a primary school teacher. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I was actually, before I went into Deakin, like I've done my doctorate and so on, but before I went into Deakin, I loved teaching. So I was still in the classroom, and Deakin needed a sessional lecturer. So I was doing sessional lecturing within my school. And so I was talking to my students about my university students about Model Solar, and we invited the students, the primary kids, to talk about it. And the Deakin kids were really amazed that, we just didn't do it. We've done that, been there, done that. And my students found it really puzzling to come from potential teachers. Why wouldn't we want to keep doing it and improving each year we do it?
So this was your primary students.
Absolutely.
So here's a question for you, and I guess there's maybe two parts to this question, because I have noticed a lot of schools they embed it in the school program, which I think is good because, and you can comment on this later on, I guess, but I think it's good because it makes the students take it a bit more seriously. And we'll come back to that later on. But then the students, as a result of that, the students only do it the once. Your students were coming back again and again. Did you have to embed that into the education system so that the students had it as an option every year? Or was there something else that brought the students back?
Yeah, and that can be they've brought up a really good point there, Clint, because I think students really want to do it. And my students, so I used to get a bit of a deal from my principal. I would be relieved from yard duty and I'd run the program over lunch hour. So the students volunteered to do it. So they really wanted to do it, and they kept coming back. Like they did it in year 4, year 5, and year 6. And then some of them went on and did it in secondary school. And some of those students then went on to do engineering. And we can name them.
Gotcha. So on that topic then, so you, I guess you effectively went down the path of where it was a voluntary thing, and therefore your cohort was an inherently motivated cohort.
Yeah.
Like they wanted, so the kids who weren't interested in that, they never came into the picture. So I guess I've got another question for you now, and maybe it's hard to answer one way or the other. But do you think if you want to get the most out of model solar vehicle, it should be some kind of a compulsory program that is embedded in the coursework, or do you think it should be voluntary?
Now, I'll do that in 2 parts.
Sure.
Some schools, when I was over in Adelaide for the national competition, one of the South Australian schools, they had it embedded in the program. So every student, I think it was in year 9, did it. And they didn't, and quite a few of them were really passionate about it, and you could tell them, but some were not interested. So they disappeared halfway through because they were giving up their weekend and they were reluctant to do that. I know a couple of Melbourne schools have it embedded in their program, and again, with varying degrees of success. So it's a really hard one because with staffing, to have a teacher who's willing to give up weekends and lunch times and that sort of thing, they have to be really committed. And at my old school, which I won't name, when I left to go into Deakin, part of their job prescription was they had to be willing to take on Model Solar Challenge. And that's why it's still going in the school.
Gotcha.
It's a really hard one.
Yeah. So I think and at this point, I just want to remind anybody watching this video, we do have other videos on our YouTube channel dedicated to getting parents involved to run the programs for the school. So as Wendy rightly says, it can be a lot of extra effort. But there are ways around that. You really can leverage the community if you want to. That's just a side issue. So I guess we didn't quite answer it, did we? Because I guess that's a way of saying there are pros and cons to either.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll ask another question for you. I've got another question for you. Is it possible to do a hybrid system, like even pedagogically and even practically? Is it possible to do something along the lines of making it compulsory for, say, 1 year, but then having an avenue whereby students can come back later on and do it the following year if they wish to? Can a school double?
Yeah, I think it can be because, again, going back to my own school, we had like a bit of a hybrid program. The kids made model solar boats, but they also came in from other schools in our cluster, and I wrote a report on each student's learning, and that was quite successful. And sometimes when other students, so I'm going about this in a bit of a fuzzy way, I suppose, but if students don't know anything about it, they don't know what they're missing out on. So perhaps to have like 1 term of a compulsory unit or a semester, and then after that, if students want to continue, they can continue. Because I think sometimes students who haven't had the opportunity don't know what they're missing out on.
So I guess that from a practical perspective, you could therefore make it compulsory in, say, term 1 or term 2.
Yes.
And that means you don't, at that stage, while you've probably had to buy some materials and equipment, and ideally the students have built a vehicle that works, you haven't had to pay for them to register. You haven't had to organize an excursion or anything like that. And then in the second semester, you just see who the motivated students are. So you've still gotten the pedagogical advantage. Obviously, as organizers of the event, we would like to see every student attend. We love a big event. But if a school chooses to have just the heavily motivated students attend, then it is more cost effective for them with regards to registration, probably managing, and that could be why you get a hybrid system. I hadn't thought of it that way, because I was always thinking you have to find a way of having the compulsory students and the volunteer students in the same room at the same time. But what you've suggested would be a way of actually not having that. You just do it at different times. So there'd be these students who are, I guess, conceivably waiting for second term or third term or whatever it is to jump in.
Yeah.
And there's a very good way of doing it.
As the school has been running a program for a number of years, and what we used to do at my old school was it was a big, in Monday morning assembly, the solar challenge kids, whether they're doing cars or boats, would go out in assembly and, report on what they'd done. And when the competition came, regardless whether they won or lost, and we'll get on to that winning and losing a bit later as well. But, it was a bit of a refreshing change from the sporting champions always being the focus of school assemblies. Kids are there for their academic and practical abilities. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, so that reminded me of something. It was last year. And once again, if you take a look at our YouTube channel, you'll see some interviews with the students as well, and what their experience was. And I remember when I was interviewing some of the students, and I said, I'm just going to interview you. I'm going to ask you a few questions, and then we're going to put it on the internet. And one of the kids said, does that mean they'll play it at assembly? And it did seem that for kids, particularly, I guess we're talking about primary school students here. I don't think this would work at secondary school.
Yeah.
In primary school, if it was something that was mentioned at assembly, that had a lot of cachet with the students.
Oh, absolutely.
So I guess to get as much out of Model Solar Vehicle Challenge as possible, you would recommend that it be something that can be featured at morning assembly, things like that.
Absolutely.
So those students who do it feel as though they're valued for doing that, and other students are motivated. And I guess, go ahead.
I was just going to make a comment there because it relates to, one of the parents who I ran into when I was shopping. And she said, Wendy. And I think, I don't even know your name, but she recognised me because John and I tend to run the solar boat. And
John is another member of the committee, just for those of you who are listening right now, wondering who John is.
And she said, my son absolutely loves it because it's not sitting there reading books and doing, he's actually hands-on. And you can see a reason for, and we might get onto this a bit later, but like you're collecting maths data to make decisions, which is the best, and you're sort of identifying variables and all of that sort of thing, but it's in a really practical way, not out of a book. And he loves it for that reason.
So I guess it's another thing to keep in mind is that to get more out of Model Solar Vehicle Challenge, you can view it as an opportunity to engage, I guess, what some people would call the kinesthetic learners. So if you want to get something more out of it, just be mindful that this is your opportunity to engage some of those students who you believe have the cognitive capacity to do quite a lot, but just due to the way things are taught doesn't suit them. And I guess getting back to I was saying about the assembly as well. I used to be an academic as well, just so you know. I used to lecture in engineering, and I used to do engineering education research. And I do remember us saying that assessment drives behavior.
Yes.
And so I think maybe in the secondary level, maybe you have to look at, it has to be associated with marks and such. But I guess in the primary level, standing out in the front of assembly is kind of like the equivalent of assessment. You're receiving praise and things like that. So it's worth being aware of those motivators as well. And like I said, we are talking about the primary level here. But having said that, did you ever look at secondary schools in your research? And if so, any thoughts on what could be done, I guess, to improve the motivation of secondary level students?
Most of my research was in primary area, even though I taught secondary students at university. And also when I was at university, it was during school holidays, I was at Science Works, running a program where we actually looked at Model Solar Challenge. And so some of those parents who were there with their kids, and I said, bring your kids along.
Yep.
I don't know what the university thought of that, occupational health and safety.
Oh, yes.
And the kids actually made the boats.
Mm-hmm.
And some of these parents were going to be secondary teachers, which is the point I'm getting at. And the beauty of boats as a starting point is they can have it up and running, a successful boat actually running in about 20 minutes. They can actually quickly make it because it's very quick and easy to put together. But in no, not any real research. I've got bits in. I'll hold up my book.
Sure.
You can see that one, and that was all on solar boat. But that was relating very much to a workshop we ran for a group of rural primary schools.
Gotcha.
And in that, that was where the parents really were important because these schools were too small to have a teacher running it.
Oh, yes.
So the parents came along to the workshop and we pointed out that this is very much about student-owned and driven, making and doing. And the parents were just there as a resource, to go and make them lunch or whatever.
Gotcha.
And,
so that topic, I guess that brings us to something else I want to cover because I think we've spoken about the positives here. I guess getting back to this, before we move on though, from the secondary school perspective, I would be thinking it probably does maybe need to be assessment-based because high school students are moving to that mindset where they become maybe a bit more transactional or something like that. Even at university level where I was lecturing students in engineering and they wanted successful engineering careers, either they had learned or somebody had told them that it's the marks that are going to help you get there. And I guess high school students probably thinking something similar. You've been marking me for so long now that's essentially become the currency.
Yeah. That's a really interesting one, Clint, because one of the issues I have always had with marking, and this is having a dig at education departments or directorates or whatever you want to call them, is that often tech ed wasn't marked, and I'm thinking the people who are problem solving in this world are very much tech ed people, in conjunction with scientists. So how dare you mark, grade them lower, in the ATAR than someone who does it because, that's making a value judgment. But that's always been a big issue, not just in Australia, but all around the world.
So I guess implicitly what you're saying, there's a bit of a tangent, but I guess implicitly what you're saying is students at a secondary level are probably going to be motivated by.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So you probably need to integrate it. Okay. I guess if any teacher at secondary school is out there and they've come up with other ideas, please share them with us. We're always interested.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because even primary kids, I've even had, because I've often mentioned kids' involvement in Model Solar Challenge in their reports, in their academic reports, and commenting on very specific things. I remember one of the girls, she came up with a really lovely solution to a problem they had when they were making their boat. And the parents and the student really valued that. It was part of her academic report. So that's something that perhaps to teachers to consider because we always tend to focus on, reading, writing, arithmetic, that use that.
Gotcha. Actually, I will divert for a moment because we've had a question here. And I think I should be able to share that with everybody. So I think we can see that on the screen there. So this is from Spiro. When it comes to teaching solar cars and boats in the curriculum, did you teach them at the same time or one after the other? Which would you recommend? So if you're doing both cars and boats, now I should say typically schools choose one or the other, don't they? It is a bit of a rarity for a school to do both, isn't it?
In my school, when I was teaching, I had parents running the cars and I ran the boats, and that's how we did it. And often,
was that concurrently?
I'm not sure what's happening.
I know when you were there, was it no concurrently?
Oh, yeah, it was concurrently.
So did that mean the students had to choose one or the other?
Yeah, so what happened often was the first time we did it, we'd start off with a boat. And I always remember the boat was called, the kids named it the SS Catastrophe because it was a catamaran design. And the first time they tested it in a teacher's swimming pool, it ran backwards and went to the bottom of the pool, therefore the name Catastrophe. So they did it. And then, we didn't do very well in the competition, but they actually had it working. And so the next year, those students then went and made a car. So they went from the boat to the car. And that's not a bad way of doing it, Spiro, because because the boats are pretty straightforward. If it runs backwards, why is it running backwards? Think about how you've wired it up. Oh, yes, we'll change the wires around the motor and it ran forward. And, all of those sorts of things. Whereas the car, you've got the gearing and it's a lot more, depending on whether you get the kit car, but personally, I like the kit car if you just want to have something that works. But the student design car is where, students can really excel.
Gotcha.
And thinking of, students in Sydney last year, and Spiro's girls were up there. They did very well with the boats. That was something where you could really see the problem solving coming out in that competition there.
Gotcha. I have another question. This is from Paul Merriweather. Does the interest in STEM make a difference to that? And I guess what Paul's talking about here is the way you would run it and the inherent level of interest that the students have in STEM. Would you tune the way you run boats, or whether you choose to do both, or whether you run them concurrently or do one or the other? How would that be affected by the interest in STEM? And I'm assuming that's by the students, but perhaps even also by the level of interest in STEM on the part of the school's leadership as well.
Yeah, there are a whole range of issues, because I had very good support from the principal, because he saw it he actually saw it as a bit of we're running a STEM program. And so it was quite good for student enrolments in a primary school, because it was another option that students could go into. And the school I was at was, it's not far from Monash University. So a number of the parents were lecturers at Monash. And so they were quite interested in any sort of program where their students could sort of pick up, even at primary level, all those STEM skills.
Gotcha.
So I think the interest in STEM does make a big difference, because if the principal's not behind you, it makes it really, really difficult. And
the level of interest in STEM from the students, how would you factor that one in?
I think the students have to have an interest. Now, in our school, when I was teaching, I used to run, we had a rotation program, and I'd run very specific, not always solid boat and car, but I run specific sort of STEM program where the students were presented with a problem, and they would they would design and make a solution. So it was very hands-on, minds-on with that. And so that really stimulated their interest. And I think...
Sorry. Continue. Yeah. Apologies.
No, that's fine. So I think, I think having STEM right through from, preparatory year or right through is really important.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. I hope that helped, Paul. So we're coming towards the end, and I guess we kept it fairly positive. We've discussed before why I'm going to ask this question. What do you think the big mistakes are that parents and teachers can make, maybe more so parents, when it comes to getting the most out of something like the Model Solar Vehicle Challenge?
I think one of the key, I know parents really want their children to succeed. And so sometimes they're really passionate about it and they tend to take over rather than having their students design, make, problem solve. It's very much about thinking of how you question your students. So oh, that's not working. Can you, what might be some of the reasons? And the students look at it. Oh, a wire's come off there, but they've actually noted that and fixed it and done something about it. Because one of the things we have sometimes in the competition is you'll have someone's boat stops working. And, as one of the judges or people running, I can see why, and probably John down the other end can see why. But the students then immediately take it out of the pool and hand it to the parents because they don't even know where to start. So basically they have learned virtually nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a shame because it's not about winning. And that's the beautiful thing about, and I've been criticised by a book editor for this, and I said, no, it's actually true. In the competition, sometimes, in the state competition and the national competition, if some student's boat has a last-minute glitch, I remember one of our female students said, I would rather wait until that team has fixed their boat because it's not about winning. It's about, having competition. And sometimes I've even seen at Science Works, I've seen students lending a school they're competing against, might be a solar panel or some part, because it's all about participation. It's not dog eat dog. And I think that is a really important thing to remember. And sometimes, and my students would roll their eyes, I'd say, oh, isn't it good it didn't work the first time? And they roll their eyes. And I said, because if it worked the first time, yes, you can put it together. But think of how much more you're going to learn through solving a problem and getting it to work finally.
It is very hard to learn from your successes. It really is. So I guess, and this is something else I think we've said before, is sometimes the hardest thing to do is nothing. And therefore, as a parent or teacher, sometimes the best thing you can do to support your child's learning is to stand in the corner and put your hands in your pockets.
Exactly.
And it feels incredibly frustrating, but that is actually the best thing you can do.
Yeah.
We've actually got a question here from Paul's had a follow-up question, and I think he was getting back to earlier when we were talking about our attitudes towards the technical subjects and how they're downgraded. And he was asking if that sort of assessment of those kinds of subjects is related to the overall interest in STEM, I guess, within society as a whole. And maybe he's getting a bit more philosophical and off topic from what we were talking about. But do you think that maybe the reason why those tech subjects have been downgraded is because of maybe our attitude towards STEM? And Paul, if I've misunderstood your question, by all means, correct me if I'm wrong.
I think it has very much so because I'm going to dob my family in here a little bit. I come from a fairly academic family, and two of them have got science degrees, but they and their partners bought an old derelict house. And so they've now turned around and done a trade. So one of the girls has done an electrical apprenticeship, and the boy's done, carpentry, and another one's done plumbing. So because we need people with those sorts of skills. So these schools have got high academic skills, but we need to value those practical skills very much so, because otherwise as a society, I don't know where we're going to end up.
So there's, so a lack of understanding of the importance of those skills.
Yeah.
Now we are about at time. I guess having said that, I think we've been very clear, like the best thing you can do is nothing. Is there, and I think you alluded to it earlier, but maybe you should focus on it a bit more, was that there is a certain way you can question your students.
Yes.
Like that's where you can be involved to maybe help by asking the right questions. You help the student formulate their problem-solving strategy.
Yeah, and I think it's very much about having a conversation with students. So, right, I noticed you're interested in doing solar boat. So what sort of things do you need to know? So really open-ended questions. And one of the things that's really important is to actually read the regulations, because we've got, like, if you think about boats and cars, they can only be a certain size, otherwise they don't fit in the pool or on the track. So John and I had the students, and we've never ever they actually had to go and rebuild their boat because it was about, a metre long and about 50 centimetres wide, and it was too big to fit in the pool. So we sent them off because they had mixed up millimetres and centimetres and all that sort of thing.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So that's...
I was going to say, the question that Spiro's just put, what strategies do you think would help teachers to allow more independent problem solving in a structured way? And I guess that's probably, I think what Spiro's talking about here, and correct me if I'm wrong, Spiro, is that yes, we want this independent learning and things, but we probably still need to have some structure around it so that we at least know we're creating something, we've got some control over the environment, and we know that the students are progressing their learning. It seemed to me that what you were first saying is get the students to read the regulations. And I would think asking the students to read the regulations and extract the key pieces of information that are important to them. Like, as they read through it, and this may be where you could help them, you could say, okay, after reading that, how big can your boat be? How many solar panels can you use? You could ask have you extracted that? I guess today you have to be cautious about kids being smart enough that they don't just put that into a something like ChatGPT, which is entirely possible. But that's probably, I would think, that is a somewhat structured way to give all the students the regulations, and then ask them, or instead of saying, "What have you extracted from this? What do you think is important?" And you could probably do that in a group dynamic as well. If you got the students, let's say you had a class of students, got them into groups of 3 or 4. Get them, come up with your own list, and then compare what one group says to what another group says, and feed off each other.
I think that's a really important point, Clint. To have students working collaboratively, because that's one of the features of the solar challenges, that that collaboration between students to come up with a successful outcome. Now, thinking of Spiro's independent problem solving, so one of the key things, of course, they use a solar panel, and they can wire that in different ways. I know, in series or parallel. So actually having students find out, rather than telling them, when it's really bright and sunny, it's best in series, and cloudy, it's parallel. How can you find out which is the best way to decide which you have? So it might be actually putting it on their boat or car under different conditions of sun, and testing it out and collecting data, and that's fairly structured.
Yeah, I was going to say, on that topic, I guess if you did it on a sunny day, you could shade the panel yourself. You could have something to shade it, to emulate. So just in case you're a teacher sitting there thinking, well, now I have to wait for winter and now I have to wait for summer. You could wait for a sunny day and just try covering it and see what happens. I guess following on from that, I guess teachers could have a number of exploratory questions where they say, related to the technology, and then you've provided the structure, as in you've got, say, 5 different pieces of information you need the students to extract, but you let them work out how they're going to answer each question. So you've now got some structure. They've worked on the way that they'll solve them. Probably from an engineering perspective, I would add that you could also create established times for design reviews, where you actually, I would definitely say start building early, or doing the kinds of tests you're talking about early, so they get a tactile sensation for how the technology works. And then having, at key points, having design reviews. And in those design reviews, you can say, well, tell us about your design, why you designed it that way, how it's gone, and what you're going to try differently next time. So you have a very clear structure there, but it also encourages the students to reflect upon why they did what they did, what they've learned, and then based on that, what they would do next. And this is basically how we design products in industry. But I guess from an educational perspective, I think that would help. But what would your thoughts be on that, Wendy?
And also, I agree wholeheartedly. But I think one of the important things is to collect data the right way through. So from the first design, whether it's photographs or short video clips, so you can go back and thought, maybe we could try this. So you need to have a record of exactly what you've done right the way through.
And that is probably something where both parents and teachers could help from the get-go to encourage documentation. Because if I recall what I was like as a child and children I've seen today, at that age, you're just not thinking about documenting things.
Yeah.
Life hasn't been long enough for you to think you should document stuff.
Yeah. And I think one of the problems with a lot of students hate writing things down. So therefore, a little video clip and, thank God for modern phones. You can just do it with, mum or dad's. Probably all kids have got smartphones now. But, documenting that and even sort of putting a bit of voiceover. We did this because of this.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the result.
And what about parents and teachers acting almost as secretaries? Like you're saying, so tell me about this design, writing it down, how quick. So that could be a way parents could be involved by actually, I guess, doing the work nobody wants to do, basically.
Yeah.
The secretarial work, yeah.
And some parents, I've run a number of competitions, including Tournament of Minds. And I'd say to parents, you're the gopher. So if they need something, you can go and get it. So, and I've even done this as a teacher. Tell me what you're making. You need to have, set out what you're actually planning to make and what tools and equipment materials you'll need. Mm-hmm. So they have to really think about what tools and equipment materials they need. And then I would go and buy them out of the school budget.
Mm-hmm. So I guess that's a good way of directing that energy and that frustration of helping your child is you can be the gopher. Very good. Yep. I think that is that's something very excellent to finish this interview on, Wendy. Thank you for that. Thank you for watching. Thank you for those questions. That was much appreciated. If you're watching this and you want to get involved in Model Solar Vehicle Challenge, by all means, contact us. Through the links on this page, you'll be able to find our website. Get involved. If you've got any other questions, you can always contact us, and we're more than happy to help. Thank you for your time, Wendy. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Take care. See you later, everyone.
Bye.